All right, we'll call the meeting of traffic safety to order. And we'll do the roll call.
Tony Roos,
Here.
Dan Kaiser,
Here.
Dan Carpenter, Neil Klein,
Present.
Greg Stifler,
There.
Michael Rossman,
Present.
Leslie Woodruff. Here. Jesse Cad. Brett Atkins.
All right, the flag's there. So if everybody please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That part of the meeting feels a whole lot more normal in person. There's actually a flag to look at. All right, public comments. Come on up.
This is the traffic safety meeting, right?
Yes.
I tried to get to the last meeting and I either had a only trademark and missed it, or I did something anyway.
You should have used my.
Yeah.
They won't report you if you don't turn my.
A little better.
Push that silver button, so push the silver button. There it is.
Okay. Okay, my family and I have lived in Newberg since 1978 up in the north side of town. We've owned two different homes on the north side of town, pretty quiet neighborhoods, and we've never paid all that much attention to traffic safety until here, probably the last 10 years. I came back from a deployment to Afghanistan, and we bought a new home over on the east end of 3rd Street, right by the airport. Maybe a block away from a lot of the lower income housing and subsidized housing up there. And we never really paid too much attention to traffic safety until about the last 10 years. And one thing I've really noticed, and I've voiced this concern to this committee once when you had an online meeting, it was probably last year, several times at the city council meetings, both in person and online, about it. One issue, I think, with respect to traffic safety, and that's derelict vehicles left in town, particularly again on the south side of town and more often in areas where there is low income and subsidized housing, things like that. You know, I sent a letter to the city and actually Officer Hagan, I think you're over there. You sent me this Saturday, June 12th, 2021. And he gave me information on the rules and regulations pertaining to cars and trailers at all, you know, private vehicles parked on public property for long periods of time. And it's actually illegal. Vehicles parked in excess of 72 hours on the street are in violation of Oregon Revised Statute 819.100. Subject to, you know, you leave your vehicle there, you're subject to fine. Okay. For trailers, boats, at all, stuff like that, it's a little bit different. That's Newberg Municipal Code 15.410.020. And that's you leave it more than 48 hours on the street, you're in violation, subject to fine. This pretty much just isn't being enforced at all. Now, I know we have a small police department here. I know they're busy, but I've addressed this several times and it just never gets any better. Now, small potatoes, you know, I'm not talking about an armed robbery or somebody robbing a bank or something like that, but they're a traffic hazard and this is a traffic safety committee. So I thought this is the private venue to voice my concern. Derelict vehicles shouldn't be there. You know, I pay my vehicle registration fees. My vehicles are insured. I don't leave them parked on the street. Now, I don't expect to be rewarded for following the rules and regulations, but isn't that what's happening to these people that are leaving their hunks of junk on the street? They're not having to pay the same fees I am. And they're just getting away with it. They're basically giving the middle finger to the rule of law. And I think that's terribly unfair to the rest of us that actually go by the rule of law. So, you if you could at least pay a little bit of attention to that, try and get some of these vehicles off the street because they obstruct line of sight, they restrict the flow of traffic, and they're a traffic hazard. One other thing I've noticed in town is people, I mean, it's just rampant. You go to any of the controlled intersections in town on Springbrook, on Highway 99, where there are traffic lights, people run red lights just rampantly in town. Now, I know you can't have a police car at every intersection waiting for somebody to go through, but what about traffic cams? I know they were unpopular. I know there was a lot of controversy about them, but there are ways to do it and do it fairly. The city of Portland's even going back to traffic cams because, well, they made a lot of bad political decisions. A lot of police left the force. $15 million was taken out of the police budget. And they had to transfer all the people on their traffic division to other duties. But now they're going back to traffic cams again. So has Newberg thought about maybe exploring traffic cams at some of the intersections where this red light running is a lot more rampant? And that's a lot more dangerous than leaving a car on the street. Something to think about. I mean, if they want to make a difference with traffic safety, that right there would make a heck of a difference, I think. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Any questions? Push button.
Yes. Hello, this is Michael Rossman. First of all, thank you for your service there in Afghanistan.
Sure.
I can tell you that Mr. Worthy, our city manager, is actively pursuing safety cameras, working with the police chief and with ODOT right now. So I encourage you to call him. I find he's very approachable as a city manager. So I won't want to speak for him and what he's doing, but I think you can. I have similar feelings as you do concerning traffic safety cameras. My wife comes up to Boucher every day driving, and it turns green for her and she waits. The other day watched a semi roll through on a completely red light.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to do
It's
that.
amazing we haven't had fatalities, and our good police department can't be everywhere at once, just like you said. So I think there's Mr. Worthy, I'm sure would like to hear from another citizen like yourself who's interested in supporting this.
Yeah, I don't know why you haven't heard from more citizens. I really don't. Kind of surprising.
Corinne, you want
Follow-up question
about, you don't have to pull it, you can just let it go.
There we go. So what do you mean by derelict vehicles? Do you mean vehicles that aren't registered or vehicles that have just been left to park alongside the road for
Well, there is
way more than that 3-day period that you mentioned?
Well,
the
in
ordinance?
particular, there's one beat up white GMC van that is just to the east of 2500 East Second Avenue. It's been in roughly the same place for at least the last 4 years. Now, it never moves. It's rusting in place, trash all over the place underneath it. And this is just one vehicle. I've actually talked to the police department about that vehicle. I went to their after hours line, made a complaint. They called me 30 days later. I gave them the location of the van, and I believe they contacted the driver and it moved exactly 8 feet. And I went back later to an online city council meeting and asked about that vehicle. And I talked to, I believe it was a police officer at that meeting. And he said, well, the owner of the van is confrontational. That was his reply. So yeah, I know it's not a very serious thing, but just kind of gets me that, you know, most of us go by the rules. Why are these people being in effect rewarded for violating the rules? See where I'm coming from?
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Did you have anything you want to add to that?
Commissioners, I just wanted to provide a little bit more information about the red light running. We are actively working with ODOT. All of the intersections, unfortunately, in town that have signals are owned by ODOT, so they all have to approve every single one of them. So we have to be able to show that there are enough crashes that would be the idea would be that they wouldn't happen if people weren't running the red lights. So in other words, if we had a lot of crashes that were rear end crashes, they would say that a red light running camera would not be a good option there because it could cause more rear end crashes because all of a sudden people are hitting on their brakes to stop at the red light and somebody is following too close and hits behind them. But we are actively looking at two intersections in particular to start with for those red light running cameras. And so the hope is that we'll have some information to ODOT that they're asking for within the next month. And then we'll go from there. So that is actively being worked on.
If you're interested, there is the guidelines, red light running guidelines on ODOT's website. If you want to see what it takes to get a red light camera improved in the city. And Karin's right, a lot of it boils down to the reduction of turning movement crashes versus rear end crashes. So there's a value assigned by the insurance agencies of a property damage, injury, or fatality at intersections for the different types of crashes that happen. And you have to show that by putting it in, there's lower long-term cost savings than there is the increase of the others. So it's an interesting process that ODOT makes you jump through to justify a camera.
So Mr. Worthy had an idea. We refer to them as traffic safety cameras because it really gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here with those.
Sure.
I see that on our citizen issue log, it's one of the items that I guess in October we discussed was the abandoned vehicles and stuff. So I can totally sympathize. I guess just a couple questions because it talks about making a recommendation to the city council for a municipal code concerning that. I guess maybe Sergeant Hagan would be the one to ask this to, but what happens to vehicles that are involved in a crime in Newberg? Do they eventually go back to the owner? If the owner is sentenced to jail, do they become property of the city and the city then sells them? I'm wondering if something like that could happen where notice is given for a amount of time, lengthy amount of time, saying, hey, this vehicle is in violation. If it continues not to move, the city comes and tows it, puts it up for sale, and sells it and takes the profits because it's in violation. I know code would have to be done, have to be authorized by the city council. It's not a easy, quick procedure, but it might be something to work towards or at least discuss further.
Am I on? Okay. The short answer is what happens to vehicles that are involved in a crime. If we pull somebody over, for example, a DUI, and their car gets impounded, it would be a very case by case type of a situation. There's very little things that I can think of where we are arresting somebody involved in some sort of a crime in a car and their car doesn't get removed either by somebody that they're with or it gets impounded or towed immediately. In the abandoned vehicle complaints and the long-term parking complaints that I receive or know about, it's usually the circumstances like this gentleman was talking about in a neighborhood where it's somebody just has a non-functioning car or not registered car. That's probably 90% of the complaints that we receive of the police department. The circumstances where there's somebody arrested out of a vehicle and that then becomes abandoned, usually the officers who respond to that situation already know that the person is going to be, for example, incarcerated for a period of time. We don't just leave the car there. And in those circumstances, things are taken care of right at the scene. So I don't think we're encountering a lot of that specific instance that you're talking about. Did that kind of answer it?
It answers it. I'm just wondering, I mean, I know you're not a lawyer and I'm not trying to get a legal opinion, but is there anything that you can think of that if this committee talked about it more and decided to make a motion to recommend to council to make a municipal code thing saying if a car is parked at a certain location for X amount of time and is not moved and is, has no current registration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, fits all the guidelines that are outlined, that it could be towed and possessed by the city and then sold. I mean, is there anything that you know of that would prohibit that?
There would be nothing that would prohibit you from making that type of recommendation. I would welcome it. I know a lot of the police officers would welcome it. The municipal code for Newberg leaves a lot of loopholes or some loose ends that makes it really difficult for us to enforce some of that stuff. For example, the 72-hour rule where somebody would park a car outside of their house or nearby their house. Usually a graveyard supervisor or an officer will go by, put a orange, yellow, or a sticker on the window giving a notice that, hey, your car is in violation of the ordinance. It needs to be moved within a certain amount of time, or it's going to be cited, or it's going to get towed. That officer then goes off and does other things, and after a timer elapses, about 3 days later, 72 hours, they show back up, and the car is probably parked across the street, or it's moved about 8 to 10 feet down the road, and the sticker's off, and it is technically now moved. It isn't abandoned because somebody has come and obviously owns it. Then you start getting down in the weeds. Do you want your police department involved with the towing of people's vehicles just because they're parked in front of their own house for 3 days at a time? It's the way the ordinance is currently written. It makes it sort of difficult to find some concrete rules, and it makes it hard to enforce sometimes.
Thanks. Can I recommend that we put it on for discussion later on in this meeting, further discussion, see if there's anything, and maybe try to get more research, put it on future meetings, agendas also, maybe we get a legal advice from city attorney or something like that on it, because I know it's kind of a little bit of a hairy situation. We don't have all the answers to, and we can't just blanketly make a recommendation without doing some research and getting some education on it first.
Renee, one question. Do you have any idea how many cars that are parked illegally? In other words, within the 50 feet of an intersection, or blocking a crosswalk, or blocking a hydrant, have been cited or towed in the city? Is that something that happens on a regular basis?
I can't say under those specific violations that you mentioned, I can't say that happens regularly. And I don't know if that specific type of a stat is tracked. I could try to find out, but I can't say that it's something that happens very often.
That's where I see the bigger issues, when they're actually causing, parking someplace that's restricting.
Yes, most of the time
Crosswalk.
we'll respond to a complaint and we'll either put some sort of a sign on or some sort of written warning, and it's resolved, very quickly, and you never hear anything more about it. But it's that's 5-10% of the time where you have the chronic problems, and especially if you're somebody who lives in the neighborhood and you see it all the time. You see that white van probably every day, and those are the circumstances where it's difficult. We could use a rule with a little bit more teeth in it, I think.
Are we speaking of vehicles that are not currently registered, or are currently registered, or either? Or does that make a difference concerning even this 72-hour rule?
I think right now that's what we need to discuss and figure out.
Okay.
Get some education and advice on, so we can determine which way we need to go, if we go anywhere at all.
Greg?
Thank you. One thing to keep in mind is that this is the Traffic Safety Committee and not a code enforcement committee. So I would like to know whether it's actually causing traffic safety issues and not just frustrations. I mean, those frustrations obviously are completely valid. I have the same frustrations. But when we talked to Brian maybe last year, he read off the top traffic safety hazards that Newberg currently sees that cause the most accidents and that sort of thing. And derelict vehicles wasn't on there. It was distracted driving by a mile. So as we're talking about things that can make a difference, just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Let's go to introductions. And
Chair, I just thought since we had 3 new people on the committee, that we should introduce ourselves, so that everybody knew that. And a lot of us have been on Zoom for almost 3 years now.
We exist more than just this.
Yes,
much.
we do exist more than just the top portion of our bodies. And then also, maybe for those of you who've been around, let the rest of the commissioners, especially the new ones, know what we talk about and kind of how it works before we get into the the chair and vice chair elections. And I can start if you'd like. Karin Hoffman, I'm the city engineer. And I have been the staff liaison to this committee for a couple of years now. We will be transitioning to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Sarah Wilson. I am the assistant city engineer.
I am Brian Hagan with the police department. I've got my own placard now, so I'm pretty excited about that. I'm currently assigned as a patrol sergeant in charge of the two traffic patrol officers. So I get to come hang out with you guys.
I'm Preston Langlayers. I'm the maintenance superintendent, so I'm in charge of all the utility maintenance and street maintenance.
So it means all the signs that we recommend you have to put in. Listen,
I'm Leslie Woodruff. I've been on the commission off and on for almost 16 years now. I was looking at the dates later in the meeting, and the April 10th is my oldest daughter's 16th birthday, and I think she wasn't quite born yet when I started. So yeah, so I'm glad to be here, glad to see some new people. I guess one thing that, you know, our commission does is a lot of this kind of problem solving. You know, as citizens ourselves, you know, we're pretty approachable. Like, we all live in Newberg. We all drive here. We all walk here, you know, ride our bikes here, and use the streets and sidewalks and crosswalks all the time. And, you know, can hopefully help bring a, you know, community problem solving perspective on, you know, one specific issue, but a lot of times, you know, some broader issues as well.
Good evening. I'm Michael Rossman. I'm one of the new members on the committee here. 2.5 years in Newberg. My wife and I moved here as she is a reading specialist at one of the local grade schools. Let's see, I was kind of rudely introduced to traffic safety as we moved here. I had a chance of driving through Sherwood on a more continuous basis and found out that you can't just pause when doing red light right turns. And, you know, and it's 9 miles an hour over, not 10, to get through the yellow light or get through any lights without a ticket and things. So anyway, it made me aware of some of the advantages of safety cameras. But anyway, happy to be here and contribute. Thank you for having me.
so I'm Tony Roos. I haven't been on this as long as Leslie. I think I'm at 10 or 12 years, something like that. I am a civil engineer by profession, dealing with roadways and highway design. Started to get involved I've lived in Newberg since '99, and I've seen a lot of change in the city of sidewalks and pedestrian focused and bike ped focused. So want to continue that, because the more we can slow down, the safer it's going to be for all of us to wander around.
Good evening. I'm Dan Kaiser. My wife Ron and I are newcomers to Newberg. Like Michael and his wife were here. We've been here a little over a year. Previously, we had been in Salem for the previous 20 some years. So I guess like Tony, I'm a civil engineer by training. Currently, I work for Northwest Natural. And I'm glad to be here.
I'm Neil Klein. I really don't know how long. Was I on the committee before you even had kids? I think I was, so I'm on.
I think you joined a year or two after I.
Okay. So
It's been
2008, 2007, sometime when Parrot Mountain was just Parrot Hill. So yeah, we've done a lot on this committee, seen a lot of action, been through a lot of commissioners, a couple mayors. everything like that. So it's a good commission to be on. There are times we can actually make a difference and do something really impactful for the city. So I've lived here for going on a little over 40 years. Went to George Fox, came up here from Los Angeles, and have been up ever since. And I'm a retired firefighter paramedic from Lake Oswego, and was working here in Newberg before that as a paramedic and volunteer in the fire department. Just right after we got rid of the last horse, I believe. So a long time ago.
Hi, my name is Jesse Cad. I've been in and out of Newberg over the years. Most recently, a couple years ago, we came back for the most recent time. I have family in Newberg going back a couple generations. My grandparents went to Fox. My parents went to Fox. I went to Fox. Yeah, just this is my end of my first year on this commission, I believe, and still learning a lot and still just kind of trying to absorb all the nuances of what goes on around here. So that's all.
Evening, everyone. My name is Brett Adkins. Like Jesse, just wrapping up a year here on the commission. By trade, I'm Director of Technology for Canby School District, and learning a lot from this group, and happy to be here. And as Neil said, happy to try and see what we can do to make a difference and improve what we can.
All right, Greg.
Hey, I'm Greg Stifler. I also just finished my first year on the committee. I've been in Newberg for, I think, 16 years now, something along those lines. Right now, I am a public works systems analyst for the city of Hillsborough. I've been there for, I think, 3 years. So I do a lot of asset management, especially as it relates to transportation. Do you guys have the cameras up on a screen there? Can you see me? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yes, we can see you.
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay, I thought you couldn't turn off my camera. I'll leave it on then.
I skipped over the next agenda item. It just says elect vice chair. I skipped over the chair part. I'm like, no, we're electing the chair too. It's all within your realm. All right, next thing on the agenda item is a change of the chair and vice chair. And are there nominations for the chair for 2023?
I nominate Leslie Woodruff.
Nominations?
I nominate nomination closed.
Do you accept? Excellent. Any other nominations? Hearing none, nominations are closed. All in favor of Leslie being chair for 2023, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Excellent. All right, nominations for vice chair. Didn't do succession planning very well.
So what are the duties of vice chair?
Fill in when Leslie's not available. It's the chair and vice chair is really simple. Karn and staff do a great job of putting the agenda together, and about 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of the meeting, the draft agenda will come out for your review. Anything you want to add or subtract or ask clarifying questions on, and then the team was in now does a great job getting it published and distributed. All you have to do is come to the meeting prepared, just like you would as a commissioner, and then run the meeting if Leslie couldn't be there.
No volunteers, I'll volunteer, I guess.
All right. So that would be Dan Carpenter's. Yeah, Dan Kaiser, I'm sorry. Screwed those up. Any other nominations? Hearing none. All in favor of Dan Kaiser being the vice chair? Say aye. Thank you. Good luck.
Total faith that Leslie will be here every time.
Except for the months that end in Y.
Oh, yeah.
She did do that.
Yes. Woohoo, you did it.
Oh, thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Okay, moving on. One thing I will add, I should have said, I work at Joanne Austin Elementary. I'm the ELL assistant, which stands for English Language Learner. So I get to work with kids of all grades, and I'm also the bilingual secretary at the school. So that's what I get to do during the day. Let's move into consent calendar. We've got our meeting dates on one of these pages. Oh, after our traffic citizen issue log. So consent calendar and has the meeting dates and meeting minutes from our September 12th meeting. So we'll just take a quick look at the dates. We've got today, April 10th, we meet quarterly, July 10th, and October 9th, second Monday of each month. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections on meeting dates or the agenda? I'm sorry, not agenda, minutes.
You said the minutes were attached here?
Well, I don't think I said that actually. And they don't appear to be attached.
Chair, they were not attached. That was my bad. We had had several meetings since then.
Yes.
And so they didn't get reattached to this agenda. So we can put that off if you would prefer, and we can bring it back to the next meeting to get them approved then.
I think maybe just as a way for, for the returning members and the new members to get caught up on what we've been talking about, that would be great. In that case, let's just approve then the meeting dates. I don't know if I need a motion. Go ahead, Neil.
Move to approve.
All those in favor, say aye. Okay, any opposed? All right. Ooh, I never used the gavel before. It's kind of fun. Okay, thank you. Staff reports, Officer Hagan.
Hello again. I don't have a whole lot. I just usually throw some statistics at everybody just to give some updates about, what we're doing as a police department. And I'm currently the on-duty supervisor for everybody out there working. So if I get up and run out of here, this means just that something's going on and I gotta leave, but I'll hang out as long as I can. In the meantime, we were able to compile all the data from the traffic stats for the last year, 2022. And so I'll throw some of those at you. The Newberg Police Department made 7,144 traffic stops last year, resulting in just over 3,500 citations issued and just over 1,800 written warnings issued and 142 DUI arrests from those stops. I don't have any crash data at the moment. I know that that's something that comes up regularly, but we will happy to respond to any questions or emails over the next weeks so I can compile that stuff as your guys' questions come up. Secondary issue, our radar trailers. Sometimes neighbors, we have 2 radar trailers that you might see in the neighborhoods from time to time. You go by and the speed goes off. Well, somebody a couple weeks ago picked up one of our radar trailers in Dundee and pushed it down the hill and smashed it. So we only have one at the moment. So they go into rotation throughout areas of the city, but we're down a trailer at the moment, but we're working on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, question, officer, concerning the DUIs. So if I heard you right, that's one every 2 days and are between, is that both Dundee and Newberg, these
Yes.
statistics?
Yes.
Just seems like a lot, but maybe I'm very naive.
Greg, go ahead.
Thank you. Brian, do you have any, you probably don't in front of you, but any idea what those numbers look like year over year compared to 2021, 2020? Are they up, about the same, lower?
You know, they provided me the stats for 2021 and I didn't even know you were
Oh.
gonna ask that. I can throw some numbers at you.
Yeah,
Uh,
thank you.
So for 2021, the citations, or sorry, the traffic stops was 5,300.
Mhm.
So we're up about 2,000 more traffic stops for the year. The citations issued in 2021 was 2,300. And again, I said this year's 3,500. The DUI arrests for 2021 was 113. And again, last year was 142.
That's a pretty significant increase in stop. That's like 50%. Is that related to any kind of increased enforcement, or do you have any idea why those stops have increased so much?
It could be a variety of things. Our staffing could be one. We're getting more people on board who are going out and being proactive in traffic enforcement. I know from the early and midway through the pandemic, you know, we were easing off a lot of our contacts with people in the traffic enforcement, and we all saw, you know, the roads kind of go backwards with people driving crazy out there, and it was clear that you need to step up the enforcement again to keep people from speeding and driving crazy. So that might be a reflection of just being more proactive with the traffic enforcement. And our new chief, well, not new, but Chief Cosmic, he's been here forever, but he's very proactive with traffic enforcement and encourages us to be out and be busy and being visible in the neighborhoods doing that stuff.
All right. Thank you so much for that information. That's really great.
Sure.
Yeah, Tony.
How do the DUIs compare to other cities of our size?
I'm not sure. I can tell you that just from my experience working in other agencies, that's pretty common. There's there's a lot of drunk people out driving around, particularly more so people not just under the influence of alcohol, but it's drugs as well. And so that's out there.
All right, thank you for bringing those numbers to us.
You bet.
Karn, engineering. Or maybe Sarah, are you here listening tonight? Okay.
I didn't figure, she's only been here a month. I didn't figure I'd just.
Okay. Introductions, warm-ups, here we go.
So for those of you who are new, we do have a citizen issue log, and this is where we document all of the concerns, comments that we get from citizens at the city, you know, just what they've said, where things are, what we've been doing or not, as the case may be. In a lot of cases, we need more data, more information before we can move forward on that. So really, since the last meeting that we had, obviously we don't have the last pages attached here because this ends in 2021. And I know we had some in 2022. But all of there was only one thing where we were moving forward. We put stop signs in on Edwards. And this group approved that. And then the other things that we have been doing are gathering more data, more speed data. In fact, we just asked Sergeant Hagan to get us some additional data on Mountain View Drive. There was a request for some traffic calming up on Mountain View near Buckley Avenue. So that's where that is at. And I will send you, when we get done here tomorrow morning, I will have the updated active issues log actually sent to you. So that you have that information.
Yes, your mic, please.
Question about some acronyms. I'm looking at an abandoned vehicles, one from 10/11/21, brought by TSC.
Traffic Safety Commission.
That'd be us. Thank you. Requested input from CA.
City Attorney.
Okay. And status traffic safety committee can make a recommendation to the council, that'd be the city council, on changes to the NMC.
Newberg Municipal Code.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I apologize. We get used to using those acronyms a lot.
I'm sorry, I can't resist a follow-up. So did you hear back from the city attorney, given that this was an active issue?
Yeah, we
just brought up?
provided that information back in 2021, what the city attorney had said. And then this group did not move anything forward. But it is in the purview of this commission to draft up or talk about what changes you may or may not want to see, and we could recommend that to this. We would have to draft some language and then submit that to the city council for their review and or consideration.
Joey?
Carl, there's a request for deer signs on Mountain View.
There were requests for deer signs on Mountain View, and we are moving forward with installing those.
How do you tell the deer where to go?
The signs are actually to tell vehicles that deers may be crossing. I have resisted putting a marked crosswalk in for ducks, which I have been requested to do in some places. I have refused on that scenario. Because that I really can't, tell the ducks that they have to stay in the marked crosswalk. I don't know, Sergeant Hagan, can you cite ducks if they don't stay in the marked crosswalk? Probably not. Yeah.
I don't want to get that.
All right, thank you. Any further questions for Karen? Okay, moving on to old business. We've
Well,
got two
do
items.
you want project updates?
Oh, thank you. Yes.
So a couple projects, as we've already talked about, red light running cameras, those are in the works. And then just so everybody knows, is that the legislature did actually also allow for if you have red light running cameras, you can set them up to do speed also, but you have to have the red light cameras in first and those be operational before you can activate the speed portion of those to issue citations on speed. So just kind of know that those two things are going. The two intersections that are actually being further evaluated are 99W in Villa and Main Street and 99W coming into, well, 99W, it's First Street, coming eastbound at the NEPS, correct. So those are the two locations that are being further evaluated right now for the installation of red light running cameras. So just kind of know that that is going on. Other construction project wise, North Meridian Street, ADA ramps and sidewalks is complete. And so that actually provides a full-on pedestrian access from all the way from Fulton at Friendsview all the way to downtown. And actually, if you cross the street in a couple locations, you can get all the way from, which I'm very proud of, all the way from the hospital, all the way to downtown, not on 99W, on a sidewalk. So that's pretty impressive. We've made that leap because we've had some gaps. Now, I'm not saying that all of the ramps are completely ADA compliant, but they all exist. So it's a big step forward. We've got still some work to do, but I think that provides that alternative mobility for people who can't drive, don't drive, those types of things, and or just want to walk. So that's a big plus. The sidewalk moving north on North College, which is an ODOT project, which is going to get started in April. So that will be under construction soon. Elliott Road is currently under construction, as people are aware. If they've driven over on Elliott Road, it's all Tony's fault. So just blame it on him if you have things you want to do. But again, when that is done, there will be continuous sidewalks and bike lanes from 99W all the way to the high school, which I think is again, a big step forward on that for safety purposes for students in particular. The other one that we are getting started on is, and we've talked about it at this commission quite a bit, is the intersection of Illinois, Main Street Highway 240. We are currently finalizing scope and fee to go to council to award the feasibility study. Again, it's money just to look at options and come up with a preferred alternative design. No money right now for construction, but taking that big first step to talk to the neighborhood about, what do they see the issues? What do they see as solutions? Engaging ODOT, this commission, the council, those types of things. So we have, when there is money available, we have, what we think is the right solution to make that intersection safer and move that forward. So those are all going forward. Pavement wise, we continue to work on pavement projects. The two that will be done before the end of June is Bircher from 99W to Hayes. So if you use that, know that there's going to be section of that road that are under construction for once the weather gets better. And then also Sherman, just north of 99W will also be paved before the end of June. So those are the ones that are ongoing. Have I missed any road projects, transportation projects? Okay. So those are the projects that are ongoing at this point in time. Actually, ODOT phase 2 bypass, phase 2A technically, will be under construction starting this summer. And that will include the construction of a quarter of a clover leaf at the intersection at 219. It will also include the realignment of Winooski Road to line up with Wilsonville Road and an installation of a signal at that intersection at 219. Again, that's going to be managed by ODOT. It's completely their project. And as a part of the detour, Wilsonville Road will get closed at one point. So all of the traffic will get routed Corral Creek to Fernwood. And then also at one point, the bypass itself will be closed. So all of the traffic will come down 99W. So just kind of be aware of that as we move forward through that work. So that's what I have.
All right, thank you, Karen. Old business, complete streets. We've got, yes, go ahead.
That was actually, Tony had been reaching out to the chair of the planning commission.
Missing each other.
Okay, so this was a conversation that this group had about the idea of starting the discussion about what the streets, we want the cross sections and the streets to look like in Newberg as we move forward. We've had conversations, do we put bike lanes in? Do we have to provide bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities, but are there other ways? Do we want to look at other things and those types of things? So we had talked about putting together a small subcommittee between folks from this committee and the planning commission to start having that discussion. We will be starting to talk about the TSP, a new TSP in probably another couple of years. So kind of leading up into that makes some sense. But I know, like I said, Tony was trying to reach out and hasn't had it.
Personally, both called each other twice. Eventually, we're gonna.
And TSP stands for,
Transportation System Plan.
thank you. Complete streets, for anyone who isn't familiar, is just, it's a very holistic, complete concept of what a street provides. It's not just for driving a car or vehicle, but biking, wheelchairs, strollers, walking, bus, transit, any way. We don't have rail transit in Newberg, but any way to get from one point to another. And the more ways that a street can provide those modes of transportation, the more complete it is. And as a way to, offer ways to get around, but also to enhance the community that we, live and shop and work in. There are a lot of benefits for, the businesses, the residents, the schools, the environment, the transit and transportation. So it's something that the city of Newberg is definitely working on, improving those different facilities where it's possible and when it's financially possible. There's always more that can be done, and it's something that this group has talked about several times and, continues to advocate for. Tony.
So part of the reason we want to have the joint meeting with the planning commission is right now our transportation system plan is very prescriptive in what the street cross section looks like. It's a 6-foot sidewalk, a 4.5-foot planter, throwing numbers out. On-street bike lane of 5 feet, 12-foot travel lanes, 14-foot center turn lanes. It's just very much prescriptive. And that's good for development. So the new development that comes in and they're just doing a greenfield rebuild, they can put that in, but when you apply that to a retrofit to a Main Street or Elliott, implementing the typical section to have a complete street isn't always feasible. And so the idea of taking the complete street and put it into the TSP to give a little more flexibility for the city engineer and their teams to get the function, if not the form, of a complete street. And so it's something that has to be blessed through the TSPs, get routed through planning commission because it is a planning document, then the city council for ratification. So if we start laying the groundwork now with PC, hopefully when the TSP comes to update, and that's every 7 years, 10 years, it gets updated. And ODOT pays for that update. But with ODOT paying for those updates, a lot of times they get an ODOT focus. They look at 99, they look at 240 and 219. You want to focus on the local streets to make sure and get it through planning commission that we want that flexibility in the complete street standard.
Yeah, Jesse.
So from what I'm taking from that, I'm not an engineer of that type. So it sounds to me like you're saying that instead of saying you will do X, Y, and Z in every situation, you're saying you will provide the following functionality, however you need to do that. Is that the idea that
Within parameters,
Right, within
there's
some
an option to look at a two-way bike ped facility on one side and no facility on the other. That still meets the code requirement the Caron has of having to put in a bike facility and a ped facility, but you're just reallocating that cross-section space.
Okay, but right now we would have to put one on both sides because
Correct.
that's how it's mandated.
Yeah, and you have to have on a collector road, 36 feet of pavement curb to curb. That's the way the code's written, that's therefore.
Does that also include like varying the width of the bike lanes and travel lanes to, because like on a redevelopment, you're kind of pinched between existing land uses? So you're talking about that kind of flexibility, okay?
So the next step is Leslie will have to connect with planning commission chair Chris
Right,
to schedule just a kickoff introduction meeting.
right. Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
What are some of the potential objections that you anticipate people having to implementing this in the TSP?
Implementing a complete streets concept. I think the biggest issue may be, in most cases, most people are going to be on board with it. I think the issue is one, setting the parameters, and setting how, whether we're setting criteria or whatever it may be on how things could be approved or not approved, as the case may be, if that makes sense. And then developers, a lot of times they want very certain things. So if it's not certain, that can become a little bit more challenging. But I don't know that anybody's going to completely object. I can't imagine anybody would do that. Like I said, I think it's going to be more the devil's in the details, if that makes sense, about how we lay it out and what we think is important.
Ronnie, did you have another question?
No.
Okay. Great, thank you. Let's see, then we've also got a bike lane update.
So this came as a question from Chair Woodruff about how we do bike lanes. And I know we talked about it at our last meeting in general, although we didn't have a quorum. Those of us that were there talked about it. And the question really came up is about as development is occurring, do we require, if a bike lane is required on that street, do we require them to put a bike lane in? Do we do things like, just make them pay money for a future bike lane? What are those pieces of the puzzle? And I had indicated that I would go back and talk to several of the jurisdictions and find out what they do, if anybody has the magic bullet, because none of them are great options, let's be honest. And nobody really had anything better. Some do the as you go, some do the you pay me, some do you widen the street, but you don't mark the bike lane. And then you have people who park there. And then when you go to mark the bike lane, then it becomes you're taking my parking away. So there, unfortunately, especially as we're requiring it to happen as development occurs, there aren't any great options, unfortunately.
Well, and this ties right back into the complete streets concept. The vision and the goal of complete streets is wonderful and fabulous, but these details of really making it work. For example, I bike to work every day, and I pass every day on 2nd Street between Meridian and Center and Meridian. There's a new development, kind of multi-use, on the bottom is retail, on the top is apartments. And they've got a little teeny tiny bike lane for half a block, because that's where that new building was. The rest of the block was already built, and so there's no bike lane there. Well, you can't use the bike lane because it's parked up with cars. And so, yes, they met the requirements of providing a bike lane with the new development. However, bikers aren't able to use it. Cars, I don't know how they're feeling about parking in the bike lane, but it's. And then maybe drivers are, watching a bicyclist ride down the middle of the lane saying, well, there's a bike lane over there. Why aren't they in the bike lane? So making these things really work out is where it gets really tricky. And it's just an ongoing problem-solving adventure. Yeah. Tony.
So this is a motion we should make or be considered as traffic safety to help Karn set that policy for Newberg of build it and stripe it, build it and allow it to be parking, or take a fee in lieu for those. Are you looking for that kind of a recommendation from traffic safety?
I would say right now, what we do is we require them to build it and stripe it. If the commission wanted us to look at other options, then yes, I would take a motion to that effect. But if you want us to continue to do as we're doing, there's no need for that.
Yeah. Tony.
So following up on that, I talked to my group that does bike ped nationwide, and the resounding consensus was build it and stripe it. You'll never get it. You'll have a hard time getting it back when the neighbor does build. Just for what Karin said, it's people start parking on it, and now we're taking away their parking spot that their realtors told them was their parking spot, because they're the second, third, or fourth owner of the property. If you haven't striped it the first one, and it's never going to be cheaper than today to build it. So whatever fee in lieu money you get today, 5 years, it's not going to cover the cost. Or cover along down the road. So the consensus was build it, stripe it, and then it becomes an enforcement issue of people parking over the bike lanes.
Well, and then I wonder also, as a cyclist, I generally ride in the traffic lane itself so that I don't get hit, car doored by someone getting out of their car. And I'm more visible, and every once in a while, a driver will be angry at me, but for the most part, I'm just part of traffic moving along. And yeah, I'm curious about the application of sharrows and how prescribed that is. If there are certain rules for when sharrows, which if you're not familiar, kind of two arrows with a bicycle symbol. So, and it's in the lane of traffic itself, meant to share between cars and bikes. We have a few around town. If that would be an option.
And those are dictated in the transportation system plan about which roads are supposed to be noted with bike lanes and which ones are supposed to have sharrows and share the road. Technically, all roads, you share the road. It's just the sharrows make it more obvious to people that there will be bicyclists there. But yeah, that is actually prescribed in the TSP at this point about where bike lanes should be and where the sharrows should be. Again, not something, I mean, we can certainly talk about changing it as we move forward. Again, now is the time to start talking about this list of things that we want to change in the TSP, or make sure at least gets talked about as we work through the TSP. Maybe it doesn't get changed because we don't come up with a better option, but at least that it's being talked about. And as we move through the TSP, I know previously on the planning commission acted as the ad hoc committee for that. But Carl Berkey from this commission sat on that group also and helped formulate that, or at least provided traffic safety's, input and brought it back. So again, be thinking about that. We're a couple of years out, but be thinking about how we might want to incorporate into that whole planning effort. Because again, now's the time, and we hit up, the planning folks and the planning commission and the folks in engineering that'll be working on those as we move forward and make sure that we're getting what we need for this group.
Does the group have a leading one way or the other towards possibly making a motion along the lines of what Tony was talking about? Or do we want to sit and think about it for a while, maybe come back at our next meeting, thinking about, if I can restate it correctly, making a motion this would be to advocate to council that we can direct the city engineer on striping bike lanes.
I think that's what the code section already says, that and that's what Karen's enforcing now is what the current code is. But if we wanted to change that,
Got it.
that
Thank
would be
you.
our recommendation.
Is that something that's currently in TSP? Does that give you, does it give you as city engineer the latitude, the information, the parameters you need to be able to do it effectively, or what you think is needed, or are you kind of constrained by what is written in the TSP?
Mostly I'm constrained about what's written in the TSP. The TSP does say that, actually, it's not necessarily in the TSP. So the TSP and the development code work together. And so it's the development code that says you shall build, the cross section that's listed in the TSP. And it allows for some fee in lieu, what's called fee in lieu of. So basically the developer would pay in what that cost would be into the city. It allows that in very finite circumstances, if that makes sense. In most cases, it does not allow for that. And again, I have been, and I'll say it hasn't always been enforced in years past. But I have been enforcing what the development code says, which says that people have to build the full cross section and build the bike lane with the striping involved. And that's different for a lot of people. But if we wanted to go with something other than building the full cross section with the bike lane and striping, then we would have to make some recommendations to make changes to those code sections.
So I guess just my own understanding, what would be better for you and practical for you as city engineer is if we piecemealed it and made a bunch of different motions that went to the council that made different things, or if we, since we're so close to coming up with a revision to the TSP, just taking all that stuff and, you know, trying to incorporate it into the TSP, so it's all in one location opposed to the TSP plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this.
From a staffing resources, I would say it would be better to do it all at one time versus piecemeal, unless we felt really strongly that we needed to move forward and do something right away. But otherwise, it would make more sense is just we keep our list and then we do it all at one time.
That would be my recommendation, Chair.
That was a great question. Thanks, Neil. Yeah, I agree if there are any other comments or other ideas, but I agree that bringing it all together with the TSP in the future makes the most sense. Okay, thank you. Moving on to new business and in-street crosswalk signs. This was one of our discussion points at our last scheduled meeting, which had been I think trying to get in our meeting for the last quarter. We'd had to postpone it a couple times because of absences and lack of quorum. And so we didn't have a quorum at that meeting, but we did just sort of bring up a few different issues or questions. And this was actually a question that I had about the in-street crosswalk signs down on 6th Street in front of Edwards.
Correct, Chair. They were installed as part of the Safe Routes to School program. And they were taken out in a lot of cases because of the construction. So we just put them in and then the construction happened with the big trucks. They couldn't avoid them very easily. So once that construction is done, they will be put back in. I do know people complained about some concerns about they were in the way. People had to slow down in order to get past them, which is kind of the point in a lot of cases. Not saying that they haven't been hit, but as part of the Safe Routes to School program, for those of you who don't know, it's a state grant that we get. We put together things to make it a safer route to get to school. And what we'll do is we've done the improvements now, and then we'll evaluate it over the next couple of years. Did it help? Did it not help? Does something really not work? We need to take it out and rethink whatever it is that's looking out there. So yes, some of them got taken out almost right away because of the construction traffic. And then, like I said, a couple of them were, well, I have to slow down to get past that. I can't, it's like, well, it's kind of the point, especially in front of the elementary school. So that's where that sits right now. So unfortunately, with the construction, it's tough to evaluate how well it's actually working. So it'll probably be another year as we watch that and monitor to see how it's going.
And I would think one thing you're monitoring for, if there's damage to the signs. I feel like I walked past one time and one looked like it was in pretty bad shape. And I don't know if any had been damaged enough that they needed to be replaced already. But I was curious about that.
Again, I think we took them out after that because of the construction.
Okay.
So that some of them will go back in.
All right, thank you. Next item of new business, historical stamps. This was also an item that I had a lot of questions last time. My question had been, as you walk around, particularly in the old part of Newberg, as you're walking on the sidewalks, you'll see a lot of times the stamps in the curb or the sidewalk, either the date or the street name or the company who laid the sidewalk. And there was a survey done just a couple of years ago that was an inventory of all of these crosswalk or sidewalk markings and their location and what it said. And there are a few other things on the inventory as well. There are a couple horse tie-ups and I forget what. And this summer, there was an ADA ramp installed near our house. And a section of curb was removed that had a stamp with the street name on it. And that just made me think, is there any sort of coordination between these two things that are going on, you know, this piece of Newberg history that was taken out for good reason. What happens to the curb? This particular curb, the guy working at the site said, oh yeah, it's over in our yard. We could bring it back tomorrow. And he never did, unfortunately. Yeah, my question was, is there a plan in place, or what happens to those curbs that get taken out? Or is there something that we could do? It's a very open-ended question.
The short answer is there is no coordination and there is nothing that happens today with those. Again, the question would be, what do we do with them?
Right.
You know, do we can go put them all in Preston's office or something. Unfortunately, the short answer is we don't do anything now. Again, if this group wants to talk about options, we can certainly talk about options. We would have to look at what the resources would be and what do we do with those ultimately? And I'm not sure I have a good answer for that,
Right.
except Preston's office.
Neil, what's your brilliant idea?
That was brilliant. Isn't there an historical commission? I'm wondering if we can reach out to them, see if they have any knowledge or any interest in possibly addressing it, or if they've already addressed it, or, you know, something like that. Maybe they know some outside resource that could possibly affect. At least it's a question we can ask of and see if there's anything, and if not, we can come back and react how appropriately then.
What do they want to do with all these pieces of concrete?
I think the word's called punt.
Well, the question of City of Portland, when we do a street project that has one of those horse tie-up brass rings, we have to take it out and reinstall it. So they know the curb has to change for whatever reason, but the function or the horse ring goes back in.
Okay.
Same thing with stamped concrete. If there's a name on it on the curb for a street name, or I haven't seen very many where the contractor's names, but usually it's a street name that's stamped into the curb that has to get re-stamped as well.
Oh, re-stamped.
Yeah, so you
Okay.
throw the old concrete away, it's usually in pretty poor condition.
Yeah.
But the new concrete gets the new stamping back in, because if they put it back, then they're not in violation of any historics. State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO. So something that the historic committee could recommend. I don't know if it's a traffic safety purview.
Right. Okay, great suggestion. Thank you. We also added to our new business tonight from our public comment about the abandoned vehicles. And if that is something we would like to pursue further as a traffic safety commission. Jesse.
Yes, I have a question for Sergeant Hagan. You'd mentioned some of the loopholes and issues with enforcement of the existing rules. I was wondering if you, or maybe next time you could bring back, if you have any suggestions of if you could have new rules, what would those be? That would make it easier to enforce the intent behind these rules that are already on the books.
I could do some research on that and try to find maybe in fact, I was looking at Sherwood's the other day, trying to get some comparisons, and I thought they had some things in theirs that we don't. So just doing some comparisons like that would be good. I think it would be important for either city council or the commission here to have a discussion about the bigger picture of what you want. What are the goals of that ordinance? Keep in mind, it isn't just a black and white issue. Sometimes we're getting into issues where neighbors don't like each other, and all of a sudden they're using us to come pick on each other and cite their cars. And that's not stuff that we want to be involved in. And so you have to have it worded and nuanced correctly so that we avoid some of that trouble, but also satisfy, folks like this gentleman who, have legitimate grievances about cars that are just up on blocks in their neighborhoods. So that would be my opinion.
Clarifying question. What are we talking about vehicles that are currently licensed Because are the regulations codes already crystal clear as it concerns out of date tags on vehicles? Those vehicles, yep, they can be impounded right now or within 72 hours, and there's no ambiguity for you, officer.
There is currently in the language that where we have to enforce, there isn't anything specific about it being licensed. For example, a car that is totally licensed and clearly belongs to a homeowner parked on the street in front of their own house would be eligible under this ordinance to not be able to park there for more than 72 hours. So a neighbor could then complain, which would spark a call to the dispatch, which will spark a police officer response, and you'll start that process, right? And which will usually result in that homeowner saying, hey, this is my car, leave me alone, or something to that effect. Or the car will then just move across the street, and then the neighbor will call again, and it's just a kind of an endless cycle. Now, there's the other side of the coin where there's legit vehicles parked here for months that have grass growing underneath them. They're not functional. They have flat tires. Those things, that should be very clear to be able to get rid of those types of vehicles and keep them off the street. It just would be helpful to have the language built in so that we're avoiding the first scenario. You know what I'm not being very articulate, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Okay, once again, I ask, is it crystal clear though today, if a vehicle is unlicensed, whether it's owned by a homeowner or not out in front, if it's unlicensed, do you have all the authority that you need to have that vehicle removed?
And by unlicensed, you mean doesn't have any license plates at all, or just the expired tags?
Expired tags, sorry.
There isn't any, I have no more teeth to tow a car for an untagged vehicle than one that is current with a registration.
Thank you. That answers.
Tony.
Preston, with street sweeping, you're trying to sweep streets every 2 or 3 weeks, rotating around the city. What do you do about abandoned cars you have to sweep around every time? You can see the sweeper path that goes around them.
Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it. We do the best we can. We'll make a couple trips back during our sweeping route each month to see if we can hit it. It gets worse during, October, November, during when the leaves are dropping. But if the vehicles don't move, there's not much we can do.
Are you reporting those to the police or enforcement?
We let them know of general areas that are of concern. And they do the best they can, but it comes back to the game he's kind of talking about. So they'll mark the curb tires or whatever. If it moves 6-8 inches or whatever, it's technically considered moved. And so it's really difficult unless the code is written correctly for the officers to enforce.
Yeah, Michael.
Someone raised her, I think it was
Great.
Greg, thank you. That we're not the code enforcement committee in this. If, as talking about this, are we outside of our germane, or is this relevant?
Mhm.
So that's a question to you.
Right. That's a great question. I think where I fall on that is traffic safety, everybody wants to live and be in a place that is safe to move around. And that is a livability issue. And codes are written so that streets are safe and houses are built safely, and, codes are in place for a reason. So I think there is some overlap between Traffic Safety Commission and code, and no, we are not directing the police department. We don't do code enforcement, but we are related to how code enforcement occurs. And it seems like there's a possibility that this group could have some influence on how the code is worded so that we could improve the traffic safety and livability of Newberg. it seems like there's some room that we might be able to do something on this issue. I would like to at least try.
Thank you from the newbie.
Okay, great question.
One of the things I would like to bring up is, abandoned vehicles in a way do bring a safety to traffic, because people work on their vehicles, on those abandoned vehicles, they're crawling underneath their vehicles, they can't see. People can run over the legs, like, people can step out. Some of these more abandoned vehicles that people might be living in with either the kids or families, whatever, unfortunately. The kids, family could step out around vehicles. It creates more of a pedestrian
Right.
collision and safety risk. And they're just harder to see around as they get more decayed and stuff like that. I mean, there are risks involved there. Oil spillages, you know, that creates slippery roads and things. It is a gray area, but there's definitely an increased risk with those vehicles.
Okay, thanks for that perspective. Neil.
Two things. One, I'd like to follow up with that I think from a traffic safety concern, I think abandoned vehicles probably are a little more of a traffic hazard or at least a pedestrian hazard because they're forcing a lot of instances on some of our narrower streets, people to drive more towards the center or pedestrians who can't, if there is no sidewalk or any really good thing to walk on the side, they're not walking on the street and they're more susceptible to traffic that's driving down the road. So if we can, you know, in those instances, if the vehicle wasn't there, we can get them more towards the curb in the absence of a sidewalk. It seems like that's a safety issue right there. Hopefully one final question for Sergeant. Is there any, I know you talked about Newberg Municipal Code, but can you think of any OARs or ORSs that would apply to this that would be outside, obviously outside of our jurisdiction here or recommendation?
ORSs that deal with abandoned vehicles specifically. We adopt the existing ORSs and enforce them through our Newberg Municipal Code. So essentially, the language is if it's not exact, it's very similar to the reason that we get to impound a car because it's abandoned or a safety issue under our Newberg Municipal Code because of the language that they have taken from the ORSs that are already existing. So in answer to your question, there isn't any other state statute that's out there that we could be using that I'm aware of. Now, there are tools that we can use. For example, you have a car, let's take a Honda Accord for some reason. It doesn't have any license plates on it. The VIN is obscured. The ignition's punched. That leads me to think that maybe that's a stolen car. And so there's tools that I can use to go force my way into that car or tow it to get a VIN inspection to then have the car removed that way. But that is those are rare occurrences.
But you can't think of any OAR or ORS that would restrict us of moving forward on having a vehicle cited, moved, towed, you know.
I'm not
anything
aware
like
of
that.
anything that would be restrictive. That might very well be the case, but I'm just not aware of one. I'm sure. I mean, I know municipalities can have very restrictive parking ordinances. It's just up to whoever crafts them.
Brett, then Dan.
Maybe just a point of clarification. I think where we're landing at is there's this overlap. So I'm wondering, just as a newbie, what is a recommendation to the council look like from this group? Like, what is that process? Is it a post-it note? Is it a document? Is it a tap on the shoulder that Karen has?
That's a great question. Karen, do you have the procedural answer to that, or should I give it a try? Okay, I'll give it a try. You correct what I get wrong. Okay, so we come to a decision tonight, whatever it is. We vote on it. We've officially approved it. It's in our minutes. That would go on to the city council agenda, not necessarily, definitely not their next meeting, but you know, their agendas are planned out quite a ways in advance. So at some point in the next couple of months, probably, something like that. It would come up as an agenda item for them to discuss. There would be a staff report to give them some background, you know, possibly, you know, a representative from our group would come, probably me. Anybody else who would like to is always welcome, you know, to answer any other questions about the discussion that we've had, you know, since we were there tonight. council would consider it and either come back, ask for more information and make a decision at a different time, go ahead and make a decision that night. And that's I think the basic process. Did I get it mostly right?
You did. You did. Yeah, this group would obviously helped craft some of the language that you would want to see. In that, we would have to run it by the attorneys and those types of things. But yeah, any change to the municipal code requires an ordinance, which requires two hearings in front of the city council unless they waive the second one. And it would definitely require somebody from this group, at least one person from this group, to go and advocate for whatever the position is that the Traffic Safety Commission has.
Good question. Dan?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think we'll agree it's a safety issue. It kind of feels like it's outside our purview because it's also gonna morph into a legal and a political issue, and that's probably best handled at the council level. And I think that's basically what you just said. And maybe it's a recommendation from us that we ask them to tee it back up and they start to look at how they could refine the ordinance to give the police staff, the department staff, more authority and more teeth to deal with the problem issues that they need to deal with. So, my opinion.
Okay, good thought.
Yes, maybe a recommendation from us, or like you said, we could help give them some guidelines, I guess, what we'd like to see them come up with, but ultimately, like you said, it's got a city council plus the city attorney have to weigh in on what they can and can't put in the ordinance probably.
So stepping back for a moment, looking what the goal is the goal clearly to the vehicles with grass growing underneath them, so clearly are there. Is it non-functioning vehicles, but yet vehicles that are clearly being used, just not necessarily every 72 hours, should not be harassed, but those that are non-functioning are, before we start even thinking about crafting language, to get a sense of what's a fair objective look like that an average citizen is going to say this is not discriminatory, and it's common sense.
Neil?
So I guess I'd like to recommend that we don't get too far on it tonight. It's something we've talked about before, but it's just never really stayed on, the burner very long. Something else has pushed it off. So I think what we should do is go ahead and wait for, police to come back with some recommendations on what would help the quote unquote teeth in the language that could help them do their job, that maybe at the next meeting, we can have it on the agenda. If that's enough time to get some information back, we can discuss it a little bit further then, kind of have maybe some more of that. I just don't want to get too far down one path and find out that, wow, we're somewhere we shouldn't be, or we shouldn't have gone. Now we got to backtrack and go down somewhere else. Let's staff do some research, get us some information, find out a little bit more about what the parameters are, and then we can have a discussion on that. And if we need to, maybe ask staff to do more research if we have further questions at that time or need further information. I see this as being possibly a 2 to 3 meeting, and it could possibly be a year before we really actually get to the point of being ready to send something to council, because it would be my hope that when we do it in such a way that it has what the police department needs to be able to do what the citizens want, and it's all there, and we don't have to kind of keep on putting band-aids on it or anything like that to try to make it effective. So if we take the time now and get it right the first time, hopefully it'll be most effective. But the police department needs to be able to fulfill what the citizens need.
Thank you. And I was also thinking, we don't actually have the municipal code in front of us. Like what does the code actually say? Before we try and make something new, like, yeah, we can't get that tonight. So let's take our time, make sure we're moving forward correctly. Tony, then Michael.
Can you reshare the city attorney's opinion from 2021?
Thank you. Oh, same comment. Okay. Jesse.
Yeah, so the one thing I would want to make sure we don't, that we have clear actions to take from this or to whoever is going to do them all. I mean, I know that we've been talking about various things. What I've heard so far is we need a summary of the current rules. We want to hear from that previous opinion from the city attorney. We need to clarify the goals that we want to actually see achieved through this. We want information from the police. Any other suggestions that maybe can be researched from other locations and cities. And then we'll be ready to start recommending some changes. Does that sound about right?
Sounds like an excellent.
And
summary.
who would research what other municipalities, what I call best practices? Officer, okay.
Brett.
Just appreciating what Jesse said, but I like what he said about goals, and I think it's important to think about our goals as they relate to traffic safety and not where they potentially may step into other areas of authority.
Right. Thank you. Karn and Brian, does that give you a sense of what we're asking for? Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you for doing that. All right, that brings us to the end of new business. We have commissioner comments. So this is a chance to, if you have anything you'd like to share to the commission, this is your chance. We'll just start from, if you have anything to share, go ahead, say it. Otherwise you can just pass. Actually, we'll start with Greg. Anything to comment on tonight, Greg?
Thank you. No, not at this time.
Okay. Brett,
And no comments.
Jesse.
I had sent an article to Karen. Did you have any further information about that?
I do. So what Commissioner Cat is talking about is the fact that as of January, the authority for setting speed zones, speed limits can be delegated down to the city. In years past, it was always those speed limits are set by the state. If we wanted to set a speed limit on Villa Road, we would put together some information. We would send it to the state, and they would do a traffic evaluation and study, and then make a recommendation one way or the other and set that. What they have done is they have set it up so that they could delegate that authority to the city. Now, the challenge with that is the fact that we still have to do the same things that ODOT would do in that scenario. And unfortunately, at this point, we don't have the resources available to do all of those traffic investigations and those types of things. Not to say that it won't be something that we might want to look at in the future. But after rereading it, it's not that the rules have changed. It's just they've just delegated that authority to us, and then we take on all of that additional work. So what I would say is right now, we don't have the resources to take that on. But like I said, it's something we can continue to look at.
And it can only be done on city-owned streets. You can't do it for a county street or a county road or a state highway.
Jesse.
Follow-on question from that. If we were to want to say open discussions about slowing down parts of 99 through Newberg, what kind of a process is that?
Astronomical.
I figured, I just wanted to ask. So, but there is a way, theoretically, you go to the state, you try to make your case for why you think it would be a good idea to lower the speed limit.
Theoretically correct. You would have to come up with good reasons. In general, the state looks at, they would evaluate how fast people are already going on that road. And they don't tend to reduce it below that unless there's a documented safety issue or, a big pedestrian generator somewhere, or school or something like that. But in general, their first take is people are going as fast as they feel they safely can. Now, that's not always a great, but that's where they start from. But the chances of reducing the speed on 99 are probably slim. I won't say it couldn't happen, but it's pretty slim. And yes, it would require the state to completely buy in and do all that.
That's why it's important to change our TSP in the cross sections of the road. Because right now people drive as comfortable as they are. So if you put a 14-foot lane, people are gonna blow through it. If you drop that down to 11 feet, people are gonna go slower because that side friction goes up, speeds go down. And then you can change the speed limit once people start going slower, the way the rules are written.
And the other one to remember is the fact that especially in the downtown, in the couplet area, there is the downtown plan, and the goal was to reduce the number of lanes in downtown down to 2 and make the sidewalks wider, provide more seating and those types of things on those sidewalks that could help in the downtown area. Again, that's a massive planning effort that needs to occur, and we just haven't had the resources to really step up and start that process.
Can we research data from back when there was 2 lanes on both Hancock and First Street? It wasn't that long ago, like 30 years ago, it was 2 lanes, and then they did the massive redo and went to 3. But I thought part of the bypass was, some of the discussion with the bypass was to be able to doing the bypass was going to reduce that back down to 2 to try to incorporate more pedestrian and such traffic. in
Yeah,
downtown
that's the
area.
first step. The next pieces are that you have to go to the state and go through their planning and the mobility and the OTC, which is the Oregon Transportation Commission. There's a whole litany of things that you have to do in order to do that. And when we've talked with ODOT about it, they haven't been necessarily opposed. It's just a matter of, again, going through that process and getting the staff resources in order to do that process. Because ODOT is not going to step up and actually do it. It's going to have to be us that pushes that forward. But again, it's not that that ODOT staff has been opposed. It's just, again, a process that has to happen in order to make that work.
Neil.
As I recall, a couple of meetings ago, we talked about trying to reduce speed limits on city streets down to 20 miles an hour. Is that something that we were talking about putting on future agendas, or going from 25 to 20 on city streets?
We had talked about it, and then the group kind of decided that, or I took it as the group decided that it wasn't as important to go down that path on city streets. If we want to put it back on the agenda to talk about, we can certainly do that.
I would ask the chair to ask the consensus of the group, especially since the climate has changed quite a bit since then. So see if we want to bring that up for future agenda items to discuss.
Okay. So the having a discussion on our group of lowering, this would be a citywide or on city streets, residential streets that are currently 25.
It would be part of the discussion, but I guess my recommendation would be to give the ability for the city engineer to be able to reduce, maybe not all city streets, but at least have the ability to on some, and as needed, like we do stop signs and other things if it's needed and it's warranted and things like that. With research, if someone comes and says, hey, this street over here, it went from 25 to 20, we see massive improvement. We do a study with it and find that it's warranted, and things like that. Almost like putting in a stop sign, that type of procedure and stuff. Maybe not a blanket over the entire city, but at least allows us as a commission to be able to do that with, local jurisdiction, or I can't remember what the wording is now. We haven't done one in so long, but improvement.
Local decision.
Local decision, yeah, opposed to a general decision, which would be citywide. stuff, but it also allows city engineer to do it on needed basis also. So it's just discussion if we want to go that way.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely open it up for, I guess if you'd like to make a motion, then we can just vote to discuss this at a future meeting.
Make the motion. We have future discussion on reduce the ability to reduce city street speed limits from 25 to 20 as warranted by either city engineer or this commission. In the future, open up discussion on it if warranted by the commission.
Okay, is there a second for the motion?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, one opposed. Motion passes. So future item, we'll talk about it, see what we think. Dan, any comments?
Nothing tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
Thank you. Very glad to be here. There's lots of new development in the various stages here in Newberg, and many of the citizenry, including myself, are not familiar with how current county roads that get incorporated into the city, and I'm thinking about Corral Creek, would need to be retrofitted and so, and this plays into whether we try to move forward, moving parcels of land into the land use planning boundary, not knowing what the requirements would be for roads that then come into the purview of the city. So it's something I would like to learn more about, and I know many citizens feel like they've got a concern with how whether traffic safety measures would be incorporated on existing streets once they come into a development. Not looking for answers right here, but it's one of the things that drew me to this committee.
I can provide an overview if you'd like.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So the way, and it's different whether it's county streets or not. So, but we'll start with the general. As development comes in, if there are, the development is required for existing streets to bring that street up to city standards, whatever that may look like, depending on the street. If it's technically called a county road, that is a different process. The county has jurisdiction over what goes on that road or doesn't go on that road, as the case may be. The city will not take a county road until that road is brought up to city standards, because we don't want our citizens to have to fix a road that's already been broken and it may or may not ever get fixed, if that makes sense, from a taxpayer point of view. So part of it depends as development occurs about whether or not we can document that there's actually a safety issue or not. Again, different roads have different issues. Corral Creek, maybe, it's too narrow, it needs to get wider. It would certainly get wider adjacent to that development as development occurs. So there's no specific answer, if that makes sense, but it depends on the location. If you have a specific location, you can always ask and we can provide you with that information. But the short answer is they will be required to bring the road up to current standards adjacent to that development. Whether they have to do anything further than that depends on what the issue may or may not be.
Nice, concise answer. Thank you.
Tony, okay. I'll just ask this a question rather than a comment. I see we still have an opening for a student commissioner. Is that open until filled, basically? Okay, so if anybody knows a high school student who lives in Newberg.
High school or college.
Oh, thank you. Okay, high school or college student who might be interested. It's a voting member, so they're not just listening, but they're actually participating and making decisions. Yes. Yes, all the committees and commissions have a voting member. Yeah, that's fairly new, I think the last year or two. Yeah.
I've been gone.
Right. So if you know a thoughtful, responsible, maybe we should add. No, if you know anybody who might be interested, we've got that open spot for a younger perspective. Let's see. Okay, reference information, traffic safety information, worst intersection list. It says it's attached. I don't think it actually is.
It's not.
Okay, this was something that we had been working on for a while, under Tony's care. And yeah, just thinking about ways we can improve intersections in Newburgh.
I think it was just prioritizing and saying, if you
Yeah.
get money,
Yeah,
this is one, that's traffic safety. If the city fell in a pot of money and could say, which intersection do we fix? That was the. And they
Mhm.
picked off the top one, the 240 Illinois. They found money,
Right.
they at least studied it.
yeah.
And I'm trying to remember what our second worst was. I think it was Second and Everest.
Hmm,
Is that the right one?
that sounds right.
That is. And unfortunately, that one is also under ODOT jurisdiction.
And number 3 was Mountain View Villa,
Mhm.
if I remember correctly.
Correct, and that one may be taken care of with development in the relatively near future.
Okay, thank you.
Question.
Yes,
Sorry,
Jesse.
and that list was prioritized based on,
A straw vote by TSC. Which intersection do you hate the most? And we rank them.
Newberg Dundee bypass phase 2A, we talked about that some already. Is there more that we need to know?
No, this was just a link to their webpage. So if you've got questions, this will give you the most up-to-date information about where they are, what they're doing on that project. So yeah, some of this was just to kind of get people links to more information if you're interested.
Right. And same with the Traffic Safety Commission
Correct.
information.
That will take you to our actual webpage on the city's webpage. It has the policies that have been adopted by this group and those types of things. So.
Okay. Yes, Dan.
Karen, do you have an idea of the timeline or ODOT's timeline for is it phase 2B? That's the last big piece that goes by the golf course and up the hill? Is that decades or is that?
There's no money. Maybe if they win the Mega Millions. But yeah, they're at this point, construction dollars have not yet been designated for that project. So it's, they've been working on preliminary design. They've been working on right-of-way acquisition from the savings of the last phases. But when that next one will go will just depend on when they get an influx of, I think the last cost estimate I saw was 52 million. So.
Okay, thank you.
And our very last item, adjournment with our next meeting being on April 10th. So I will call for that favorite motion of everybody.
Actually,
Oh, thank you.
are we still good with in person? Did we like this
Oh,
better
thank you.
than the Zoom? Just want to verify.
I liked it a lot. It's nice.
Okay.
Yeah, nice to all be. Yeah. Yeah, well, and it worked well. Greg, were you able to hear us okay?
Yeah, you guys sound great.
Okay, yeah, we're able to hear you just fine. So anybody who isn't able to make the meeting in person, this is, the hybrid option works really well. It does involve some extra staffing, so we appreciate the extra staff being here in person, but this seemed like a really successful meeting tonight. So thank you for asking, Karen.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Okay, all those in favor? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
You don't agree, just sit here.
Thank you. Have a good night.